Hey guys, so today we're going to be reading The Bet, which is a short story by Anton Chekhov. He is a Russian writer, as you might have guessed by the name. And it was written a little bit a while ago. It was written in the late 1800s, I believe, maybe early 1900s. And it deals with kind of that question that we did on the discussion board about money versus your time in solitary confinement. Sorry about that. It was an announcement. So we're going to be reading this out loud. I'll stop every now and then to kind of talk you guys through some stuff. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the questions and direct and indirect characterization. Okay. It was a dark autumn night, and an elderly banker was pacing his study, reminiscing about a party he had given one autumn 15 years ago. Many clever people had come, and there had been a most interesting conversation, capital punishment being one of the topics they discussed, among others. The great majority of the guests, who included many scholars and journalists, had been against it. In their view, this form of punishment was outmoded, immoral, and unfit for Christian states. Some thought that the death penalty should be replaced everywhere by life imprisonment. So that's what capital punishment means. It's just the idea of the death penalty, right? The most capital, the worst punishment you can put on somebody. So this Russian guy throws a party and they debate the death penalty, which I guess is what Russians do for fun. I don't agree, the banker told the guests. I've never tasted capital punishment or life imprisonment myself, but if I may offer an a priori judgment, I think that capital punishment is more moral and humane than imprisonment. Executions kill you right away, whereas life imprisonment does it slowly. What kind of executioner is more humane? One who takes just a few minutes to kill you, or one who drags the life out of you during the course of many years? So he talks about a priori here, which is it's Latin for the idea of like you're making a statement based on theory rather than something that you've experienced yourself. This is a pretty standard like philosophical debate technique. So the fact that he's using it and the fact that he uses the Latin lets us know that he's an educated, probably intelligent person. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about indirect versus direct characterization. So direct characterization is where the character's personality is described through adjectives. When he describes himself as an elderly banker, that would be an example of direct characterization. They're telling us that he's old. This a priori thing is a great example of indirect characterization. So that's where the character's personality is revealed through their actions and through their dialogue. So what he says here, the fact that he says a priori, lets us know that he's had some education and probably of a higher level. The fact that he's a banker probably also lets us know that. So you could, in terms of like when you're charting indirect versus direct characterization, which you're going to have to do on those questions, you would pull a quote for indirect characterization, and then you would tell us what does that quote tell us, what does it reveal about the character. So you could pull the a priori judgment quote and then explain that it shows us that he's educated because he's using a Latin phrase. Both are equally immoral, remarked one of the guests. Both have the same purpose, to take life. The state isn't God. It has no right to take away what it can't give back if it so chooses. So that's been one of the big arguments against capital punishment, was that if a mistake is made or the wrong person is convicted or whatever, because we're human and we make mistakes, then you're putting an innocent person to death. And some people would argue that that is too high of a price to pay, that there's no kind of reason why you would allow that, right? That to just put them in life imprisonment would be better. The irony there is that when it's talking about the state can't give back what it takes away, is that you can't give them back years of their lives either if we happen to be wrong about that too. So there's, arguments both ways. Among the guests was a young lawyer of about 25. When his opinion, that'd be an example of direct characterization. When his opinion was asked, he said, the death penalty and life imprisonment are equally immoral. But if I had to choose between execution or being locked away for life, I'd opt for the second without any doubt. Any sort of life's better than none at all. A lively argument had broken out then. The banker, who was younger and more excitable in those days, suddenly lost his temper, banged his fist on the table, and shouted at the young lawyer, "That's not true. I bet you 2 million that you wouldn't even last 5 years in a cell on your own." Now that number and year should be familiar. "If you mean that seriously," the lawyer replied, "then I bet you I could stay locked up for 15 years, not 5. So that's a really dumb thing that he does there. So he ups the years of the bet without upping the money of the bet. So 5 years is very different from 15. You're tripling it, right? Which seems stupid. So that tells us again something about the lawyer's personality based on his actions, this thing that he does. It shows us that he doesn't think before he acts, that he acts impetuously, which is what that means basically, is that you act without thinking. And that, you know, when he's kind of like worked up, he just kind of makes crazy statements. I accept. You're staking millions. I'm staking, or sorry, 15, done, shouted the banker. Gentlemen, I stake 2 million on it. I accept. You're staking millions. I'm staking my freedom, the lawyer said. And so that preposterous, senseless bet was made. Sorry about that. Blown up. So the preposterous, senseless bet was made. The banker, a spoiled, frivolous man at the time, again, direct characterization, who had more millions than he could count, was overjoyed at the bet. Over supper, he made fun of the lawyer. Come to your senses, young man, before it's too late, he said. 2 million is chicken feed to me, but you risk losing 3 or 4 of the best years of your life. I say 3 or 4 of the best years. I say 3 or 4 because you won't last longer. And don't you forget, poor man, that voluntary confinement is much harder than compulsory incarceration. The thought that you could regain your freedom any minute will poison your whole existence in prison. I feel sorry for you. So that tells us something pretty specific about the banker. The fact that he is kind of like taunting this guy shows us that he's kind of cruel. He's kind of mean-spirited. And he's not being a very like sporting like adversary. The fact that he says 2 million is chicken feed to him tells us that he's super rich and he likes flaunting it. So he talks about voluntary incarceration or voluntary confinement versus compulsory incarceration. So voluntary means you volunteer, you're choosing to do it. Compulsory means that you have to do it, you're being forced to. So basically he's talking about the idea of like a locked door. In prison, the door is locked. I can't just leave whenever I want to. It's not like they say you have to serve 15 years for whatever it was that you did, but we're going to do it on the honor system, Scouts honor system, and you have to make sure that you just stay in. That doesn't happen. For this, he could leave at any point in the bet. So he's saying that it'll be a lot harder, and he says that he's only going to make it 3 or 4 years. There's no way that he's going to make it 15. As the banker paced the room now, he remembered all this. So remember, he's thinking about a party that happened 15 years ago, and the timing of the bet was 15 years. So maybe the lawyer made it longer than he thought. What was the point of that bet, he wondered. What was the use of that lawyer losing 15 years of his life or my throwing away 2 million? How could that prove that the death penalty is any better or worse than life imprisonment? Definitely not. Stuff and nonsense. On my part, it was the whim of someone with too much money. On the lawyer's, it was sheer greed. A little later, he remembered the events following that evening. They had decided that the lawyer must serve his time under the strictest surveillance in one of the lodges in the banker's garden. The conditions were, for 15 years, he was not to be allowed to cross the threshold, to see a living soul, to hear a human voice, to receive newspapers or letters. He was allowed a musical instrument and books to read and to write letters, drink wine, and smoke. His only communication with the outside world, they stipulated, was to be through a small, specially built window, and he wasn't allowed to speak one word. Books, music, wine, and so on. He could have anything he needed and as much as he liked, but only via the window and by writing little notes. To ensure his confinement was strictly solitary, the agreement covered every minute point of detail and compelled the lawyer to serve a term of exactly 15 years, from 12 o'clock on 14 November 1870 until 12 o'clock on 14 November 1885. The least attempt to violate these conditions, even 2 minutes before the time was up, freed the banker from any obligation to pay the 2 million. During the first year of his confinement, the lawyer suffered dreadfully from loneliness and boredom, as far as one could judge from his brief notes. Day and night, the sound of the piano came from the lodge. He refused wine and tobacco. Wine, he wrote, stimulates desire, and desire was a prisoner's worst enemy. Moreover, nothing was more depressing than drinking good wine on one's own, and tobacco polluted the air in his room. For the first year, the lawyer mainly had light books sent in, novels with complicated love plots, crime fiction, fantastic tales, comedies, and so on. So the first year, the banker plays music and he reads. He refuses alcohol and he refuses tobacco. The reason why he refuses alcohol is probably that because it lowers your inhibitions. So if he gets real drunk, he might just be like, I don't want to do this anymore and just leave. And he wants to win. He wants that $2 million. He wants to show the banker that he can do what he said he was going to do. So he's very stubborn. And he does kind of like beach reading kind of stuff. So things that wouldn't be super complicated and just kind of keep him entertained in terms of his reading choices. In the second year, music no longer came from the lodge, and the lawyer wrote and asked for classics only. In the fifth year, music was heard again, and the prisoner asked for wine. People watching him through the window said that throughout the year he did nothing but eat, drink, and lie on his bed, often yawning and talking angrily to himself. He didn't read any books. Some nights he would sit up writing and could keep at it for ages, but toward the morning he'd tear everything he'd written to shreds. More than once they heard him weeping. So you might ask yourself, why is year 5 so hard for him? Probably because the original bet was for 5 years. He could have been done. And instead, like an idiot, he upped it by another 10 years. And since he's lived through 5, he probably doesn't really think that 10 is likely. So he starts drinking. He's gotten depressed, right? He sleeps all the time. He's writing, but he hates everything. He's yelling at himself. He's drinking. He's playing music. It's probably all sad. So yeah, he's struggling. In the second half of the 6th year, the prisoner devoted himself with great zeal to the study of language, philosophy, and history. He applied himself so eagerly to these subjects that the banker was hard put keeping him supplied with books. In the course of 4 years, nearly 600 volumes had been obtained at his request. During this craze, the banker had happened to receive the following letter from his captive. So for a year and a half, he wallows in self-pity. And then at the halfway through that 6th year, he decides, you know what? I'm stuck here for 10 years. I'm going to better myself. We actually see this happen a lot with prisoners who get their GEDs. Some of them get their bachelor's. Some of them get their master's. Some even get their PhDs in prison because you're stuck there. You have all this time. And some of them decide that, all right, you know what? When I get out, I'm going to be a better person than I was when I went in. So they use that time to try and improve themselves. And that's what the lawyer seems to be doing here. My dear jailer, I'm writing these lines in 6 languages. Show them to the experts. Let them read them. If they don't find any mistakes, I beg you to have a shot fired in the garden. That will prove to me that my efforts haven't been in vain. Geniuses of all centuries and countries speak different languages, but the same flame burns in all of them. If only you knew the heavenly bliss I feel in my heart now that I can understand them. The banker's wish was carried out. The prisoner's wish was carried out. The banker ordered 2 shots to be fired in the garden. So he's practicing. Right? He wants to know how well he's progressed. So he's practicing, has the lawyer tell him if he wrote this correctly. After the 10th year, the lawyer sat motionless at his table, reading nothing except the Gospels. The banker thought it strange that someone who had mastered 600 abstruse tomes in 4 years should spend nearly a year reading one slim, easily comprehensible volume. Then the Gospels were followed by the history of religion and theology. So he starts with kind of like hard sciences. He starts with the stuff that happens on this planet. And then in the 10th year, he starts to get a little bit more spiritual. He starts thinking about maybe his soul and that kind of thing and what this is doing to him. So he starts reading the gospel. He starts learning about religion, history, that kind of thing. During the last 2 years of his incarceration, the prisoner read a vast amount, quite indiscriminately. That means he just read everything. First, he read natural science. Then he asked for Byron or for Shakespeare. In some of his notes, he asked for books on chemistry, medical textbooks, a novel, and a philosophical or theological treatise, wanting them all at the same time. His reading put one in mind of someone swimming in the sea amidst the wreckage of his ship, eagerly clutching at one piece of wood after the other to save his life. So this metaphor makes it seem like the lawyer is drowning. Right? And the only thing that's keeping him afloat would be the books, right? So in this metaphor, the idea of drowning would be like giving up or sinking into depression or leaving the little cottage that he's staying in. And all these books are kind of the only thing that's keeping him from sinking down into that depression. As he recalled all this, the old banker reflected, tomorrow at 12, he goes free. And I had to pay him $2 million according to the agreement. But if I pay up, I'm finished. I'll be absolutely ruined. Bum, bum, bum. Oh no, he doesn't have the money. Whoops. Because he lost all those millions he couldn't count. 15 years ago, he had more millions than he could count. But now he was afraid to ask which was the greater, his assets or his debts. Gambling on the stock exchange and very risky speculation, combined with an impulsiveness he had never managed to control despite his advanced years, had gradually brought a decline in his fortunes. And that fearless, self confident, proud man of wealth was now just a small time financier, trembling at every rise and fall in his assets. So, what we talked about with the banker, the fact that he was kind of energetic and kind of angry and prone to quick action and that kind of stuff didn't change, and it lost him all that money. So now he basically has just like $2 million left, period. And if he loses the bet, he's going to have to give it up, and then he's going to be penniless, and he doesn't want that because he was a very rich man for a very long time. That cursed bet, the old man muttered, clutching his head. Why couldn't the man die? He's only just 40. He'll take my last kopeck. It's like cents. He'll marry, he'll enjoy life, he'll play the stock market while I jealously watch him like a beggar. Every day I'll hear him say the same thing. I owe all my happiness to you. Please let me help you. No, it's too much. My only salvation from bankruptcy and disgrace is that man's death. 3 o'clock struck. The banker cocked an ear. The whole household was sleeping. The only sound was the rustling of the frozen trees outside. Trying not to make any noise, he took from a fireproof safe the key to the door that had been unopened for 15 years, put on his coat, and went out. It was dark and cold outside, and it was raining. A sharp, damp wind swept howling around the whole garden and gave the trees no peace. The banker strained his eyes but couldn't see the ground, the white statues, the lodge, or the trees. As he approached the spot where the lodge stood, he called out twice to his watchman. There was no reply. He was obviously sheltering from the weather and sleeping somewhere in the kitchen or in the greenhouse. So all of a sudden, we get to kind of figure out what's going on with the weather here. And it's described as dark and cold and raining. A sharp, damp wind is howling around, and it's shaking the trees. So all of a sudden, it creates a very specific tone, right? This description. It makes it seem kind of scary, kind of ominous. Makes you feel like something bad's going to happen. If I have the courage to carry out my intention, thought the old man, then the first to be suspected will be the watchman. So here we have to ask ourselves, what is his intention? Right? So he just said that the only way that he's going to get out of this, because the guy is going to win the bet, right? He's 40 years old. He's got only a couple of hours before he has to, that he just has to kind of wait out. And he's already done 15 years. It's likely he can do these last, 7 hours or whatever. So the only way that he can win this bet is if the man dies. But he's only 40. So the banker is contemplating killing this man. And he knows that if he kills him, the first guy that they're going to blame is the watchman because he's out there and nobody else is awake and he's alone. By groping about in the dark, he found the dark steps and door and entered the hall. Then he felt his way into a small passage and lit a match. No one was there, only some sort of bed without any bedding and the dark shape of a cast iron stove in the corner. The seals on the door leading to the prisoner's room were intact. When the match went out, the old man, trembling with excitement, peered through the small window. In the prisoner's room, a candle burned dimly. The prisoner was seated at the table. Only his back, the chair, the hair on his head, and the hands were visible. On the table, on 2 armchairs, and on the rug near the table lay open books. 5 minutes passed without the captive moving once. 15 years of confinement had taught him to sit still. The bankers tapped on the window with one finger, but the prisoner made no movement in response. Then the banker carefully broke the seals on the doors and put the key in the keyhole. The rusty lock grated and the door creaked. The banker was expecting an immediate shout of surprise and footsteps, but 3 minutes went by and it was still absolutely quiet on the other side. He decided to go in. A man quite unlike any normal human being was sitting motionless at the table. He was all skin and bones with the long curly hair of a woman and a shaggy beard. His complexion was yellow with an earthy tinge. His cheeks were hollow, his back long and narrow, and the hand with which he propped his bushy head was so thin and wasted it was painful to look at. His hair was already touched with gray, and no one looking at that gaunt, senile face would have believed that he was only just 40. He was sleeping. A sheet of paper with something written on it in small letters lay on the table in front of his bowed head. Poor man, thought the baker. He's asleep, probably dreaming of those millions. All I have to do is take hold of this semi-corpse, throw it on the bed, and just smother it gently with a pillow. And the most meticulous examination won't find a trace of death by violence. However, let's first read what he's written. The banker picked up the sheet of paper and read the following. So now he's flat out telling us he wants to murder him by smothering him, by suffocating him with a pillow. So clearly, those years of incarceration have been tough on the lawyer. He's looks much older than he's supposed to be. He's thin. He's wasted, and it just kind of sounds like he stopped taking care of himself. All he does is read, and he just kind of has forgotten about his body in terms of that kind of thing. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, I regain my freedom and the right to mix with people again. But before I leave this room and see the sun again, there's some things I feel I should tell you. With a clear conscience and with God as my witness, I declare that I despise freedom, life, health, and everything that those books of yours call the blessings of the world. That's weird. I have spent 15 years making a careful study of life on earth. True, I haven't seen anything of the earth, of people, but in your books I have drunk fragrant wine, sung songs, hunted deer and wild boar in forests, loved women. Beautiful creatures as ethereal as clouds created by the magic of your great poets have visited me at night and whispered marvelous tales in my ear, making my head reel. In your books I have scaled the summits of Elbrus and Mont Blanc, and from them I have seen the sun rising in the morning, flooding the sky, ocean, and mountain peaks with crimson gold in the evening. From there I have seen the lightning flash above me and cleave the clouds. I have seen green forests, fields, rivers, lakes, towns. I have heard the sirens sing and the music of shepherds' pipes. I have touched the wings of beautiful demons who flew down to talk to me about God. In your books I have hurled myself into bottomless abysses, wrought miracles, murdered, burnt cities, preached new religions, conquered entire kingdoms. This is something that they say, that books are kind of like the great equalizer. They allow people to experience things that maybe they'd never be able to because of their circumstances. So they allow people who would never be able to travel to experience different cultures, to see different places, that kind of thing. So that's what he's talking about here, is that he's gotten to do all of those things because he's been able to read this whole time. Your books have given me wisdom. Everything that man's indefatigable mind has created over the centuries is compressed into a tiny lump inside my skull. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I know that I'm cleverer than the lot of you. And I despise your books. I despise all the blessings of this world, all its wisdom. Everything is worthless, transient, illusory, and as deceptive as a mirage. You may be proud, wise, and handsome, but death will wipe you from the face of the earth together with the mice under the floorboards. And your posterity, your history, your immortal geniuses will freeze or be reduced to ashes along with the terrestrial globe. You've lost all reason and are on the wrong path. So basically he's saying that all of this is going to end. Everything that ever was is going to be reduced to just rubble, because people are going to end. Our history is going to end. There's going to be nothing left to mark what we did eventually. And just like the little mice that live under our houses will be dead just like them. And, we always think of them as so much more insignificant than we are, but we're just as insignificant, is his argument. You mistake lies for truth and ugliness for beauty. You'd be surprised if apple and orange trees suddenly started producing frogs and lizards instead of fruit, or roses smelt of sweaty horses. I'm amazed at you people who have exchanged heaven for earth. I just don't want to understand you. To show in actual practice how much I despise what you live by, I renounce the 2 million I once dreamed of as though a paradise, but for which I feel only contempt now. To forfeit my right to them, I shall leave this place 5 hours before the stipulated time, and thus break the agreement. It's a good thing the banker read that note first. Otherwise, he would have murdered this man for no reason. So he's going to give it up, right? So the lawyer, in all of his reading, basically became a nihilist. A nihilist is a person who believes that nothing matters because nothing is permanent. Everything is going to die. Everything is going to go away. So nothing can really be that important. And it seems that's kind of what he's become in all of his reading, is that he's just basically decided that, all this is temporary, so I don't need that $2 million, and I'll be gone. After reading this, the banker laid the piece of paper on the table, kissed the strange man's head, and left the lodge weeping. At no other time, not even after heavy losses on the stock exchange, had he ever felt such contempt for himself as now. Back in his house, he went to bed, but he was kept awake for a long time by excitement and tears. And he probably feels bad because he about almost murdered a man. over money. So he realizes how close he came to that, and he probably feels pretty bad about it. Next morning, some white-faced watchman came running to inform him that they had seen the man from the lodge climb through his window into the garden, make for the gate, and disappear. The banker went to the lodge with his servants to make certain that the prisoner had in fact fled. To put pay to any unnecessary disputes later on, he picked up the sheet with the renunciation from the table, returned to the house, and locked it in his fireproof safe. So I've always been curious, where the heck does the lawyer go? And that's going to be a question that you guys are going to answer for me. So I want you to think about that. That'll be one of your journal entries, is tell me what happened to this lawyer after he escapes. What does he do? Does he just like go back to his normal life? Does he live as a hermit in the woods? Like, does he, I don't know, become a robber? What does this man who believes that nothing is important do with the rest of his life? He's only 40 years old. And he's super smart. He could do pretty much anything. So I want you to think about that. Okay. All right. Well, hope you liked the story. It's a weird one. And I'll see you around for the next piece of Russian literature.